So yes, welcome back to the afternoon session. Delighted to welcome David Johnson, who I thought had just come from down the road because Wessex Resins are literally about 5 minutes away. And he told me he's come to the other side of the country today. So I appreciate you being here. Thank you very much indeed. Wessex Resins gave a presentation years ago, 12 years ago, maybe more.
Yeah.
And it's something that people still talk about now, actually. Yes,
So
people. Well, there you go. So there you go. They still talk about it now. So perhaps 12 years, it's we're overdue for an update. So without further ado, David, I'm going to hand over to you. And your presentation's online. Good to go.
Thank you very much. Thanks for letting me talk in front of you. Thanks for the invite to be here. It's quite nice to come down and talk in front of like-minded people. That's the case. I wanted to do something before I do the presentation. Just timing is everything with epoxy. You know, it takes a time to cure. So what I wanted to do is do a very simple, practical demonstration on a typical glass fibre repair, small impact damage that you maybe might see the actual damage, but you may have to oversee the repair. We always, in fact, as I understand, it's industry standard to prep this up in the way that the Goujon brothers encouraged GRP repairers to conduct, which is a 12:1 ratio taper minimum. That is minimum 12:1. So material thickness times 12, that should be the outside of your, in effect, a circular scarf joint. But as of yet, I know of nobody who's been able to laminate against fresh air. And we're assuming that this repair has limited access. So you would only have access from the outside. So typically, this would be a small dinky repair. It's probably not the kind of thing that a surveyor would be involved in, but maybe an insurance assessor might be involved in. It's kind of like a small yacht club dinky part of it. But this is easy to scale up, and it's very easy to see on this small demonstration exactly what I'm doing. So this is if this is an impact, I've dished this out with a Tyvek on, mask, goggles, cuffs taped up, you know, horrible stuff, polyester dust. So I've ground this to a 12:1 taper. So I'm assuming that this material is actually something like 4 mil thick. So we've got something approaching a 50 mil circular scarf joint here. But as I said, you can't laminate against a piece of fresh air. So what do? You actually conduct what we call a letterbox repair. And a letterbox repair is actually to create a little blanking piece that you bond to the back of the aperture here. That's made up of just a piece of glass epoxy laminated on a piece of melamine based board, the top of a plastic bucket lid, anything where you can obtain a release away from it. So this letterbox is very, very thin and flexible, and it's already coated in peel flow. So this now has a red to bottom face against it, yeah. So it's flexible enough. You've got to use your imagination here, because I have not got self-tapping screw. You've got self-tapping screw through the centre here, and you bend it so that it pops through the hole, having brushed the outside of this bung. It's actually called a grommet, I believe. And then pop it through the hole, draw it back on itself, and tie the self-tapping screw off to something that isn't going to dry off or move away. And that secure your nice plate on which to conduct your major structural repair. So for this purpose, and as I said, timing is everything with this. We have this wonderful product called G5. Goujon brothers who developed my system called it G5. Guess what it does? It cures in about 5 minutes. 5 to 10 minutes, depending on temperature. One of the most important things that anybody using our products can do is give good skin protection. So avoid contact with the epoxy on the skin. It's a very, very powerful adhesive, but it can be a powerful sensitizing element, a chemical, with long-term use. So anybody working in a bone bath is likely to be using epoxy, hopefully it's our brand, but long-term exposure can cause skin sensitivity. So long sleeves, safety glasses, and sinister black nitrile gloves as well are a must.
Are they going to be there?
We did them in blue as well. I don't know why I got black. I asked for these and I ended up with black. Yeah, so I think it complements the Darth Vader look. So the 5 minute epoxy, this is actually quite viscous because it's been cold. When it's warm, it's a lot lower viscosity. So you get the resin and the hardener to the bottom of the container. And you meter out exactly 1-to-1 blob of each. So you end up like that. You mix those together. I did 2 of these demos at the recent dinghy show, at the RYA dinghy show. And I don't know whether anybody's ever been to the dinghy show, but it's utterly vibrant in terms of enthusiasm and yacht club sailors. We really enjoy going there. But we're able to do these live demos because, you know, our product doesn't contain any solvent and it doesn't, it's no fire hazard in liquid form. So you brush that just around the edge of this little patch. It's a long way away, but I'm sure you can all see this. Now I remember my dad building a mirror dinghy in the kitchen, and my mum nearly threw us all out of the house because it was made with polyester resin or made with plywood, of course, but the panels were stitched and glued together with polyester resin and glass tape. And every scrap of food that we ate for the next 3 weeks tasted of polyester resin. Also got a friend who built a cadet and his brother, cadet dinghy, in the lounge on his parents' wrong order, and they didn't know anything about it. Luckily, it's epoxy. So you can see there, I'm just going to use gravity to hold that in place while I'm doing the rest of my hopefully interesting presentation. So it's a nice bit of history because I love a really good story. You know, the story about the mirror dinghy in itself is fascinating. It brought about sanitary change, you know, through a small boat design. But in the latter part of the 60s, the Goujon boats based in Bay City in Michigan, part of the Great Lakes, very close to Lake Michigan, were prolific boat builders. They were building with all the techniques that were available at the time. So that included what we understand as cold molding. So that was glued veneers over a mold where the hull is taken off the mold, hopefully used again, or if it's a one-off, just destroyed. They were using cascamite, resorcinol, the types of glue that now, from a health and safety point of view, purely, they just are very difficult to manufacture. Also very poor at gap filling. But the next slide, yeah.
You want me to do the
Yeah,
slides?
yeah.
I don't mind
Yeah.
the slides.
But they were during the winter time in the Great Lakes, all the lakes freeze over. So they have to have something to do. So ice yachting is the big sport in the Great Lakes. Also very popular in Northern Europe, Sweden, Finland, Russia. There are people sailing competitive ice yachts, and the most prolific and most popular design is the DN class, which coming right back to that whole mirror dinghy thing that was sponsored by the Mirror newspaper, BN stands for the Detroit News. So the Detroit newspaper sponsored this class. Now, these look like, really nice little innocent little ice yachts, but, probably how competitive sailing can be. It can be quite demanding on the structure, demanding on the crew and the helm. These little boats will do 70 miles an hour, and they set courses of about 170 to 180 miles in an afternoon. So they're covering a lot of ground and highly stressed as well. I don't think I've got a photo on the next image of the rig, but the rig is really weird when it actually bends to leeward, and they get greater efficiency because you're constantly sailing into the apparent wind. So originally these structures were built from resorcinol, screws, traditional paint finishes that were available in the latter part of the 60s. But quite nicely, not too far away from Bay City, is Dow Chemicals, Dow Corning. And Dow Chemicals at the time were producing adhesives for aerospace. And the CEO's son wanted to learn to iceboat race. And so there's this collaboration between, hey, why don't you try some of this funky aerospace adhesive that we're using as well? So the Goujon brothers started to build these boats where they were these iceboat fuselage in effect. And the next slide is a good illustration of this. This won't play because it needs the internet, but the courses. Oh, that was good. So the courses are quite demanding. The right of way rules are quite demanding. So they found that as they started to build the ice yachts with epoxy, they had lifespan and race competitiveness that lasted right the way throughout the season. Some of these earlier boats will go off, it's a term that Olympic dinghy sailors use with older polyester and glass fibre boats, that they actually go off during racing, during the season's racing. So, an Olympic team might have a boat they use for training and a boat they use for regattas. The same is true with those little DN ice yachts held together with resorcinol, screws, traditional paint. They absorbed water. The fixings worked on them, so they actually went off, during the course of the season. The Goujon boats built entirely with epoxy, so they were bonded together, coated, inhibiting all the moisture, transmitting all the load from even a delicate stringer into the rest of the structure. They worked so well, they started winning everything. And the Yacht Racing Authority threatened to ban any Goujon built boats unless they told everybody their secrets. And they just suddenly thought, well, hang on a minute, we're using epoxy, we'll brand it, because with Dow they'd used their laboratory to develop an epoxy they could use for coating. That was the difficulty. Solvent-free epoxy that had the qualities of a kind of good quality varnish. And so they developed West System. And at the time, West stood for wood, epoxy, surface treatment. We don't use that acronym anymore. It's just it's a trademark now. So it kind of gives you an idea of what they were angling at, treating wood as an engineering material by inhibiting moisture uptake, bonding things together, lack of fixings for direct route from moisture. So it was quite groundbreaking in the latter part of the 60s. And of course, at that time, it was the golden era of build your own boat and follow the sun. You know, my family, we built a Robert Tucker T35 in the back garden. It was like an enlarged silhouette, 35 foot long. You know, we were part of that journey. We used resourcing at the time because it was very early days. But then, you know, the whole product range evolved into what we see now, where you have the resin and hardener. You have I'm sorry, really sorry, because these look dreadfully dog-eared, but it's a sign of my busy workshop. You know, there's lots of dust going on. Then you've got the range of fillers that complement and can be mixed with the mixed resin and hardener to give it extra viscosity, to make a fairing compound, to make a good sound GRP repair. You know, it's a very, very sophisticated system that's actually simple to use with a bit of confidence. I think most people that I see that are retail customers at the boat shows, they just lack confidence in using it. So I say, well, get a scrap of wood, get a couple of bits of wood, glue them together, break them apart, and that'll give you confidence. As long as you mix it at the correct ratio, and you mix it sufficiently, you generally will get good results. We've got a lot of lovely flagship customers. Spirit Yachts have been almost a lifetime of their company user of West System products, and I always think this is like the dream job. You know, there's Sean McMillan, who owns Spirit Yachts in Antigua on one of his boats. What a fantastic job! And then of course, if you want to go faster, lighter, stronger, or faster, lighter, and maintain the same strength, epoxy composite is the only way to go, really. When you're looking at lightweight structures, it has to be epoxy. That could be glass, epoxy glass, carbon fibre, Kevlar, or a mixture of all three. What you can't have with polyester resin, which is what I would say 95% of production boats that you will be seeing out there will be polyester resin. What you can't have is light and strong. You know, you can have light and fit for purpose, but you can't get down to the weights that you're looking for here. These are laminate thicknesses on this boat. It held the Windermere speed record for that class of outboard. I think it was 100 and something insane, 108 miles an hour. And you can see it's barely a boat. It's partially riding on a cushion of air. You know, pretty insane. The laminates on that are not much thicker than a good quality photocopy paper either side of foam core. So very, very light, but actually very durable as well. You find that Olympic classes or dinghy classes that have adopted epoxy have a long, long lifespan, as opposed to a polyester boat that suffers from the micro cracking that you know, the polyester resin hasn't got as good elongation as the epoxy. That's not to say that all those 95% of boats that are built in polyester are no good. They're fantastic. They're actually production boats, sometimes built around the price, but generally fit for purpose. Or maybe you can correct me. No names mentioned. And the next slide. You know, we've been involved in some great big projects. This is all, actually, it's a shame Nick's gone because all of the spars on Maltese Island were built using our ProSet epoxy. ProSet is a lower viscosity version of West System with a far broader suite of hardens, so you can build a boat in the Solent, but you can also build a similar boat in South Africa where the temperatures are much higher. So you've got slower hardness for a more relaxed work session on a much bigger structure, maybe. And the next one. So where do I come into this? Yeah, so I've been working with Wessex Resins for 27 years, but I've been in the industry for 43 years. Before Wessex Resins, it was production boat building, mainly in Essex. We had our own Essex mafia of boat builders on Canby Island in Maine. So my company ran the mould shop at Proud Catamarans. We also built the Jaguar range of sailboats. But before that, I built the Mirage, Snapdragon, all these classic GRP sailing cruisers from an era when the materials were relatively inexpensive. I remember we built the Jaguar 21. We sold that for £11,800. I mean, you couldn't sell the same boat for £25,000 now. It would have to be so much more than labour, of course.
I'm a bit worried your glass is empty, David.
It was only a very brief moment, that. Very brief, yeah. So the technical data sheet thing is we have technical data for everything. It's easy to access on our website. There's a technical data sheet for West System 105, 205, giving minimum temperature of use, things like elongation, tensile adhesion, all the kind of things that an engineer would require. But for my error, my stupidity, my weakness, I bought a 30-year-old glass fibre boat a couple of years ago that I regarded as a project. And it's quite groundbreaking at the time. It's they're called a Kelt 850. It was a product of both a naval architect and an interior designer. And quite nice as a lifting keelboat. So on the east coast of England where I live, it doesn't draw a lot. So it's got a swing keel, but a very nice interior arrangement that at the time was groundbreaking. So I bought this as a project. It was in the elephant's graveyard in a boatyard, and unfortunately, the next slide, it had the keel, which looked like a pile of old junk. But optimistic, misty-eyed me, I went for it because it was cheap, and I knew what to do as well. So from there, I had everything shot blasted. Next slide, and surprising, this actually to clear all of the to clear this for a really good sound epoxy finish. It took 2 shot blasts, on the same day, but one after the other, and there was a lot of black that was leaching out of the casting, so probably not such a good dense casting as it could have been. But on the next slide, you'll see that I've transformed this into something rather nice. I coated and faired the fin, and I faired it with, or filled it and then faired it with a filler that we've got. It's called a low density filler. So this brown filler is it's hollow micro balloons, phenolic bubble, and they've got the same density cured as mahogany, so it's relatively easy to sand, but actually quite durable as well. So you've got this choice between having something super easy to sand, which makes the boatyard's life or the operative life really easy. But when you come to touch the sand, it'll break the filler off. So you've wasted all your time. So you've got to use something that fit for purpose. Now, once I've done that, unfortunately we don't manufacture this product anymore. But we used to make a cuprous oxide film that you could mix with the resin and pulp. And it created a very powerful anti-fouling coating. And so on this, I think I put 4 coats of this West System with this 422, it's called copper compound. It was a cuprous oxide, like a red oxide finish. And then the next slide, I did much the same with the ballast plate as well. Having some boatyard facilities was really handy as a boat owner. Boat owners probably couldn't do this. They'd have to work upside down. But I faired it up. I got the feeling that this was probably the heaviest surfboard-looking item that anybody had ever built of thing. And the next slide, and then I coated that with the copper. This is actually all done one Christmas holiday. I wasn't around much for 2 weeks at Christmas, so I had the keys to the workshop and I could do it inside. But you can see here that this had been blasted, then primed here, the darker area. That's primed with just the resin and hardener mix, filled and then faired back. So the clue to getting good adhesion is to use the product with the maximum adhesion, and that will be the lower viscosity resin hardener. So that was brushed on. I used a brush for this, so it was nice and easy to get a lot on. All the runs just occurred at the edges. So I put a coat of primer onto the bare blasted metal whilst it was outside, right? That was early on in the summer. And then once I got it into the workshop, I could sand it back, coat it again, fill it again, fair it again, and then I put some of this copper compound on here. So this is kind of like, I think it's probably like, well, I'd be proud to say that it's boatyard orientated work, but it'd never be done by a boat. It's just cost prohibitive. You know, it's just this the amount of labour involved here. It's like just an exercise in total self-indulgence doing this. And the next slide. And so the pivot, I made a pattern, had a stainless pivot box made that sits in a rebate on the casting. It actually is held captive within the boat because there's a moulded trunk in the bottom of the hull that actually holds the sides of this stainless steel assembly captive once the keel is bolted up. But I also use a fantastic product. It's difficult to see, but I bedded this on an adhesive that we do called G-Flex. G-Flex is an amazing ductile epoxy. It's got 30% elongation, whereas West System's got 4 to 5%. Polyester resin's got 2%. Sorry to come back to the polyester resin. I think polyester resin is fantastic. I love the smell of it on my floor, you know. But it does have its limitations where high performance is involved. But this is a great product. It's got America's cut. We make an adhesive that's used by Alinghi, American Magic, Ineos, Prada. It's out in Barcelona at the moment. It's a super strength product. G-Flex has got the same adhesion, but you can buy it in the Chandler's shop. So it's quite a technological buy, but it's got this ductility to it. It all bonds dissimilar materials quite well. So I bedded that on G-Flex. And you can see the whole lot is assembled upright. And this literally posts up into the boat. The moulding part of the hull holds this captive. So far I've got nowhere last season with this, but it's an ongoing project. Next slide. You see inside. This is part of the reason that the work stopped on it when the keel was originally taken off. The boatyard could not get the keel off, so they started chopping the interior. So I reinstated a lot of the interior laminate around the keel area. Next slide. And I remoulded these rebates in the keel in chop strand mat, and they are posted into those cutouts in the bottom of the hull. If anybody knows this design, it's quite a unique 30-year-old French-built boat. And you see,
polyester.
it's all polyester. Yeah.
Then you just do for the chop strand mat. Is that polyester?
Which bit?
That bit there.
That yeah. So that part of the moulding. Yes, good point. That part of the moulding was so much easier to do in chop strand mat because of the shape of it, and it is actually over laminated and bonded that to the existing moulding with epoxy. Yeah, so I still, my kind of roots in boat building are always with polyester resin, and I do find that there are areas where it's very appropriate to use it, mainly non-structural. I would never, and I hope that you'd agree with me. You know, we believe that anybody recommending repairs or overseeing repairs would recommend epoxy for that repair on a polyester boat rather than polyester on a polyester boat. The adhesion is so much better, the shrinkage is very low with epoxy, and the minimum quantities are small. You know, you can buy enough to do this kind of repair in a Chandler's shop. Next slide. And so I made a plug of the rebate for the keel, and I laminated against that whilst posted on the inside of the boat. The next slide. And then the rudder, the rudder, and I'm sure you've seen this on the moisture meter, the rudder was off clock on the sovereign meter, drilling a hole in the tip of it, just drain kind of styrenated, isocyanate filled water from. So I cut it open, scooped out all the foam. The next slide shows how I reassembled it. So I steam washed the insides of it. I checked the stock to see if it was sound, and in my eyes, it didn't have any corrosion, any significant corrosion around it. So I decided to rebuild the rudder as it was. But it's a good indication of how these are built, where probably the moulding is set up horizontally on the bench. The stock is dry fitted to that horizontally, probably in a jig on this boat because it's a production boat. It's over laminated on one side. The two sides are probably put together with polyester bonding paste and then filled with polyurethane expanding foam. So I chose to go down a different route, and I glued it together with a combination of one of our lightweight fillers and G-Flex, which you see on the next slide. So I put this in a caulking gun and glued it together. Then I filled it with an epoxy foam. So this is like a dead end story. So we had this brilliant epoxy expanding foam, which was brilliant for boatyard jobs like this. We stopped making it, and it was all because of the supply chain. During the tough times of the pandemic, a lot of this products come in from Asia and China, the raw materials. We couldn't get hold of the raw material for the expanding foam. So just that next slide, what I did there was that you can see this calculation, just like a rough cardboard box calculation. The foam expands 4 times its original volume. So I calculated the volume required with some beanbag beads, and then I reversed mathematics, the literage of the epoxy I needed, and then calculated the weight I needed. So I could actually get down to exactly 2.23 litres mix would yield 8.95 litres, which I measured off on that cardboard box of expanded foam, And so the next slide, you see the whole lot. You should see the whole lot. I mixed it up with a cordless drill with an old roller frame in it, and then glued it all together. Then the next slide. Oh, just before actually that, just return to that. This is a great point. I mentioned the G-Flex product. This area here is a brilliant use of G-Flex because it bonds incredibly well to metal, but it also has a degree of ductility to it. So where you've got metal, entering that moulding, the last thing you want is something rigid. I would imagine that has been the source of water ingress on this rudder alone, because in the boatyard they would have only had polyester bonding paste, or even worse, resin mixed with French chalk or something, which is very, very brittle and doesn't bond well to the stainless steel. So I bonded this with a combination of filler to make sure I hadn't got any voids, and this G-Flex product, which I put in an empty mastic cartridge, clamped it all together, trued it up as well with these long bits of wood. I just put them on the rudder blades with car body filler and just clouted them off afterwards. And then I filled it with the expanding foam. Sometimes I actually put the expanding foam in low down in the rudder so it would expand up, but then I gave up on that idea and I just poured the rest in through a hole in the top, which I think is the next slide. You can see it expanded, I think, just exactly as I wanted. I got the telltale of a little bit of excess coming out, but I've sounded it all around. There's no hollows. And then I went on, I think I faired it, and I think the next slide, I faired it. So it's probably the most competitive rudder on a 30-year-old cruising boat. Next slide. and it looked pretty good. It really, I mean, really, all of this is just an exercise in just self-indulgence because I could do it. You know, you wouldn't see this probably commercially in a boatyard. It would just be too expensive on labour. Sheathe the rudder, so I used some biaxial fabric to sheathe the rudder. If you're ever wondering what is the strongest form of glass fibre fabric, it is multi-axial stitched fabric, not woven, not chop strand mat. The long pieces of yarn, the long stretch of yarn, yields the most strength from the glass. Was it Mike from Marlow? Rob from Marlow mentioned about knots in rope diminishing the strength. If you look at a strand or a piece of yarn from some woven roving, it's actually kinked like this, where it crosses the warp and weft. And in textile engineering, they refer to that as fibre creep. That significantly weakens the fibre. I wish I had a piece of fibre here at the time, not because you see the significant reduction in strength. But the biaxial or quadraxial or triaxial fabric is just stitched together. So you've got these long, uninterrupted lengths of yarn that do their job. You know? So that's the best thing to suggest. If you're ever asked about that by a boatyard, what would you suggest as a format for this repair? I would recommend multiple layers of 450 gram biaxial fabric. Generally, it's 300, 450, or 600 gram. 600 grams is a bit unwieldy for an operative to work with. 300 grams is just too light to stay there. It doesn't hold enough resin to stay down. 450 is like an optimum weight. So that would be our recommendation. And so the foam actually is, the properties of the foam benefit from something called post-curing, basically cooking. So luckily we've got an oven at Wessex Resins that's 50 degrees C, so I just shoved the rudder in there for a day and it cooks the whole thing, you know, so it was pretty good. Next. And then, of course, 30-year-old sailboat, there I am, taking the, I thought, oh, I'll replace the deep sea seal on the prop shaft. I'm there, taking the shaft coupling off, and I'm leaning against the water inlet, and I put a bit too much weight on the water inlet, and it sheared away. And I'm thinking, thank goodness I found that out, you know. Thank goodness, because, you know, absolutely, the moment that happens is when you most need the engine, isn't it? It's gonna happen. So I went and bought these True Design skin fittings. Does anybody know what the glass-filled nylon? I mean, they are impeccably engineered. You know, I should be a salesman for them. I've told so many yards about them, but I decided to fit those, and I decided also to rebate them into the hull with these discs at the top of the picture are for a rebate that a manufacturer would set into the hull mould where the skin fittings are. So you can then get flush skin fitting like with a V collar on it. Yeah, next. So, yeah, before any work, you've got to sustain yourself. Forgot about it. There's nothing like a Greg's. Next picture. And you know, you need a lot of tools to get old skin fittings out. The next picture, you can see me here. I simply whole sawed them out. I just made up a wooden disc that was diameter of the inside of the skin fitting and just cut them straight out. And then I found actually that the hull in various areas was weird thicknesses. I don't know whether this had been started on Friday and finished after a bank holiday weekend. I really don't know, but there were different thicknesses in areas of the hull that I didn't think were appropriate. You know, very thin in areas around the heads, and then really thick around the waist of the thing. So what I did is I made up, on the next slide, you can see I made up some flat plate of epoxy glass with our laminating product. Again, with I actually used some unidirectional fabric that was from another project, so I used stuff that I'd already got. On the next slide, you can see I made some discs using a router to cut them nice and round, and and made them various diameters so I could stack them up to give me a finished thickness that was consistent for every skin fitting, because some areas I needed another 8mm, I think, you know, for something that actually looked good. I'm not a naval architect or an engineer. I'm probably very dangerous at both. I know enough to be dangerous at both, but I do know what looks appropriate, you know. So I made them different diameters so I could stack them and glue them together. And the next slide, you can see that I fitted them again. I fitted all of these with G-Flex, which was brilliant for bonding onto older GRP. You can see also I peel plied them. Anybody know what peel ply is? You know, it's a fabric that you can rip away, you get it ready to bond to surface. And that gave me the thickness that I wanted with what I felt was a good spread of load for a skin fitting. And the next picture, you can see I set the router up with a little disc in the middle to kind of center it. I flow coated them as well. Big myth actually that polyester gel coat or flow coat won't function over an epoxy laminate. It will. Gel coat will cure on your shoes, on your trousers, on your overalls, on the factory floor. It will cure against something inert, and that's the trick. It's inert. Anybody that's seen a failure of a gel-coated epoxy repair, they've probably seen the fact that the epoxy hasn't cured sufficiently. So we always talk about 48 hours for a DIYer, but an overnight cure, 24 hours for a yard with infrared lamps is sufficient. We actually say 7 days in our literature for a full cure. So I had some heat lamps, I cured this well. But the other thing about epoxy repair, you're going to gel cut over, it has to be abraded scrupulously. You know, I think scrupulously is more thorough than thorough. It should be 80 grit, really, really thoroughly. And so on the next slide, you see what I did on the outside of the hull. I just prepped up these plugs. And the next slide, you can see I rebaited the hull wearing appropriate PPE gear. And then the next slide, you can see that I set those plugs against a pigmented, thickened epoxy mix. And the next slide, you can see how they work. So I secured them with a self-tapper and then just release them, and they leave that impression in the hull. Normally you'd see this on a brand new hull, but again, I was just thinking, I'll probably only get one chance to do this, like I want to do it, you know, and so I did. And this has been like a whole summer working on this, up in Suffolk, working outdoors sometimes, you know, working inside the boat. But you can see here, it's quite clever. This even gives the cutter diameter for a new build. So the next slide shows me using I've got some diamond tipped hole saws, and I could cut through that in the next slide. And it does, in the instructions, it does recommend that it suggests using either Sikaflex or epoxy to bond these fittings in. Well, again, I use G-Flex to do this. And now the manufacturers have actually written G-Flex in as a means to do this, because you buy it small quantities and execute a really good bond. The next slide, you can see it's quite messy, sticky. I should have worn gloves for that picture. And then just set them in loosely, and then the next slide I think shows that, and I then tighten them up by hand and then tighten them up once the epoxy cured. For the strainer, I really went overboard with this. So I think this is quite impressive. This is like I wanted to inset the strainer into the hull. So you can see the next slide. I set up a guide for the router and just routed into the hull. I then made a piece of hardboard covered in something we call in composites flash tape. It's just like coloured sellotape. So I could release it away, and then I released that away, which I think is on the next slide. You can see I've got a nice rebate here, which the strainer sits in perfectly, you know. I'll never get this money back. But,
Get it out.
actually, it was my birthday in October. My wife said, "What do you want when your birthday?" I said, "Well, I've seen this book. It's called The History of the Plastics." So that was nice and neat. I was quite proud of that alone, you know. And the guy at the boat said, "What on earth are you doing this for us?" It's for me. It's for me. I think that's the end of that. So I then did an osmosis treatment on the boat because it had gel shield on there, and I thought I'd put another 4 coats of epoxy on it, just for me, you know. And so I raised the waterline up. Actually, in a yard, if they don't know about double masking before epoxy, they should, because, you know, with epoxy, if you just put one layer of masking tape on and wait for the last coat to go, and then get the masking tape on, you've got 2 coats already curing underneath. So what you do is put two layers on, one over the other, with a tiny little bit, maybe about a millimetre overlap on the top bit of tape. Then you do your 2 coats, take one layer off, and you still got the masking tape on the next 2 layers. Then you get it off easy. If anybody's left masking tape on with epoxy, you need a Stanley knife to get them off. And a lot of patience and a straight edge, you know. But actually, we launched all the boats at the yacht club last weekend, and I saw people masking up going like this. I said, come in, you know, and drag it out. And I always think, you know, a naval architect would have used splines and ducts to get a nice fair line. How did he do that? By, you know, long sweeping lines. So I kind of describe that. Next slide. You can see that and we're coming to the end of this slide, so I'm conscious of time. I've still got a bit of time, haven't I?
Yeah, 5 minutes.
Yeah. Just with that, this is the next slide after this. That is how you feel. You've done this kind of work on your own on a summer's day, and that pint is very welcome. So that's my little presentation. I suspect now that is secure, you know, after 5 minutes. So the next step for this is to figure out these laminate patches that you need. And for that, all you need is a really good pair of scissors and some plastic. And you would scale this up for whatever size of repair. I gave a lecture down at the Boat Building Academy in Lyme Regis last week, and they were training some overseas Navy technicians to do repairs on minesweepers, and they use a 25-to-1 taper on this. Can you imagine on the minesweeper thickness? So you get a bit of damage the size of a dinner plate. Your thread would have to be the size of a dining table and the size of that table. So with a piece of polythene and a marker, we know by measuring actually that a layer of 450-gram biaxial with finished cured thickness is about 0.45 of a mil. Each 100 grams is about 0.1 of a mil finish. So if this is 4 mil, we want probably 8 layers, maybe 9 layers to actually build this back up to the existing thickness. So the way to do that is to just take this with felt and mark off the inside of the aperture, mark off the outside where you ground to, and then mark off 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So I've got like contours on an ordnance survey map, and then take some biaxial fabric, which is this. and then very carefully, with some decent scissors, just cut 8 discs. You've all gone quiet and you're expecting me to cut 8 discs. But like every good demonstration, here is what I prepared earlier. So you've got your 8 discs that are descending in diameter to fit into that. Once you say to people that are, au fait with wood joints, it's a scarf joint, it's just a wood scarf, so generally 8-to-1, this is 12-to-1, but 12-to-1 minimum. It's definitely to be chosen appropriate to where it is going to be used, on heavy grounding on the, some of the boats that are built on the continent, they tend to just kiss the ground, and every single bit of keel structure after the trailing edge of the keel goes pop, 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 till it runs out of boats, and that kind of damage, that might be 25-to-1. I think the British Gliding Association, they insist on a 25-to-1 scarf joint bevel working on the glide, so it's just about spread of surface area. So the next question is, which patch goes in first? We always say the biggest disc goes in first. Quite simply, and that's not opinion, that's just pure logic. And the logic behind it is that so that's your material thickness X. Your taper should be 12 times X minimum. If you go for the smallest patch first, it's only the very edges of each disc that attach to the existing structure. If you go for the biggest disc first, you get the maximum continuous contact of any one disc. Plus, if it overfills like this, you're only sanding through the edges of each glass layer. Yeah. Does that make logical sense? Logical sense? Hope so. Still got a bit of time.
Go on.
Yeah, right. I'm going on. Am I the last?
No, it's Martina and then I'm wrapping
Oh,
up.
sorry, yeah, I'll be as quick as I can with this, but it's worth looking at, honestly, it's really worth it. Yeah. So the next step is to, now you've got your discs, to measure out some epoxy. We do these fabulous mixing sticks. They're really nice and reusable. They're a great choice for anybody using our products. So you've got all your discs. We're going to wet these out on a sheet of plastic and apply them to the work. Yeah. So I'm going to meter out, nice and warm in here. So this resin and hardener will be nice and usable and warm. 1 pump of resin. 1 pump of hardener. We are at great pains with these pumps, is they're marked ever so carefully. Resin pump, hardener pump. They even look calibrated, don't they? So on a Monday morning, the phone starts going, oh, your product's awful, it's all gone wrong on me. Oh, well, how did you meter out the resin and hardener? Oh, I used teaspoons. Well, okay, you could be quite accurate with teaspoons. I guess quite. Some people say, but then they say, oh, use the pumps, and then you know what's coming next. You say, well, how many pumps of resin did you use? Oh, 5. And one pump of that's 25, so one. And all you can really offer at that stage is moral support, because the moment you say how many pumps of resin did they use, you can hear this eerie silence where the penny drops on the other. It's really heart-rending for us, because if somebody does that, getting uncured epoxy off is a absolute nightmare. So the first thing that one must do, and I should really be mixing this for 2 minutes. I normally count. I normally sing "Happy Birthday" 3 times. Use a brush to brush some resin harder. We call this 2-step bonding. And you can see, can't quite see in this light, but there is quite a strong colour change to the laminate. No, almost, I get the feeling that you're almost creating like an end grain on wood, and the laminate is actually absorbing some of the epoxy. We normally, in this centre bit, we normally brush a bit of thickening mix in there, take up that transition at the very edge of the taper, so there's no air void in there. Then you're going to go down with the biggest patch first. So on our sheet of plastic, we need the smallest patch, smallest disc first. Need an overhead projector for this, then slightly bigger. You can always line the stitching up as well, so you get that plus and minus 45-degree bias of the biaxial fabric. So you can see, now I'm starting to wet that out. There is a wealth of technical publications on our website that go into kind of quite infinite detail of the use of our products and where it's appropriate to use them. And I would say that despite, illustrating that we clearly have a lot of heritage in wood and boat building, something like 80%, 85% of what we do with boat yards, so trade sales to boat yards, are for GRP repair. And it might not even be a repair, it might be something like moving skin fittings, a bow thruster, a teak deck. You will always generally see a container of West system in a yard. This is the kind of look that you're going for as well. This kind of translucent epoxy look with very little air. The beauty of doing this onto a piece of polythene is that I can use quite a degree of force to consolidate the fabric, and you can see it's actually starting to become like a homogeneous, what I would call epoxy colour. That's slightly translucent green. The demonstration that I did at the dinghy show, it lasted 40 minutes, and it was an audience in front of a little disc light. Nobody walked off. You're at a disadvantage, you can't walk off. Otherwise I'll heckle you. But at the dinghy show, there were people captivated by this, because I got the feeling that people would say, do you know what, I can do that. And I said, yeah, you can do this, probably. The thing is, if you do this badly, it won't fall off. And it'll remind you that the next time you do this kind of work, you've got to up your game a bit.
We love live demonstrations, David.
Do you?
We do. We love them.
I mean, the beauty of this is I did ask the lady as I came in, is it all right if I use some glue? I said, it doesn't smell, it won't catch fire, you know, I think that's actually, you know, there's no discernible smell. I think this has got a subtle aroma of almond biscuits, actually. So you see, that's actually incredibly quick. And you know, of course, this work could be done inside the boat in the dry, you know, with another piece of plastic over it, taken it to the outside with a cover underneath the boat, and then applied. And of course, it can be applied upside down. And the trick to working it upside down is to very carefully apply it and then roll the air out from underneath, just with your hands, just like that. And then just get rid of the plastic, and your job is nearly done. And at this point, somebody probably will say, yeah, I can imagine the invoice tonight. Typing the invoice out, you know. So that is the repair partially done. I'll just use the brush just to stipple around. This is stippling. It's not letting the brush leave the work. You can see up against the light, I've got, you know, it's upside down. I'll only hold it briefly, but, you know, there's not much air underneath there. See from the other side. And then what I can do, just to finish that off, I could leave it to tack, and I could screen it with a lightweight filler that we've got that's very GRP specific. But I'm going to use some peel ply to finish this off. So this is peel ply tape. Everybody in composites or repair or composite boat building should have a roll of this. It's ever so cheap. Saves an immense amount of sanding or labour, in fact, is the biggest thing. And you can just use some gloves to smooth this down. Use a plastic squeegee to set it down against the epoxy. And this will do a number of things, particularly if you're working outside. There's a byproduct of the curing process that's called amine blush, and it's a reaction with moisture in the air, and it reveals itself rather as a greasy, waxy film that you can feel on your fingertips. Obviously, that will compromise another layer of epoxy, another layer of filler, or paint. So you've got to remove that. So you need to wash it with warm soap and water. We actually do a cleaning solution, a system cleaning solution. The spray bottle, you clean, put it on, wipe it off with paper towels, and you're then ready to sand. So of course you've got that operation, you've got sanding, and with sanding in a boatyard, you've got, you know, all the PPE kit, the Tyvek, the sander, the abrasives, the vacuum, the clearing up. This will cost a yard about £5 for a square metre. And that £5 will buy them a ready to bond surface, and there's nothing getting in the next one is ripping peel ply away. It gets ripped away, tears away like so. And you can see underneath you've got this textured surface. So the texture comes from a direct copy of the weave of the peel ply. And if you analyse that under a microscope, you can see peaks and troughs, just the same as sanding. So this for £5 a litre in a yard at yard prices, it's nothing. You know, it saves a lot of time. I'm not going to show you because I've run out of time. I'm conscious of that. But you can see You can see the clarity of that against the light, you know, and density of that. That will be so strong that polyester resin around it will fail before the epoxy repair. There's another filler that we've got, which is more of the DIY type filler, but very valuable for the company. And you can see it on the edge here of this panel. And it's very short chopped fibres of glass mixed with colloidal silica, which thicken the mix up. And you can stipple that in to a repair just of the like on the edge of this, so like typical deck edge repair or typical corner of a rolled deck edge. This is aimed at really, this demo is really aimed at the practical dinghy owner, really, who's a bit wary of doing this kind of work. Probably can't get it done because nobody wants to do work like that on a dinghy for 60 quid. You know, there's nobody around them to do that. You know, they might do 10 dinghies like that at 60 quid a go, but I think it's just one of those things that people might say, do you know, I can have a go at that, you know. But I think it also scales up for what you're observing and undertaking, overseeing in yards, you know. All these techniques just scale up and they all revolve around good thread, good choice of materials, good operatives to do them. So of course, you know, like I said, with any good demonstration, this is the finished article. So that's actually filled. So we've got a filler that's pure white. It's glass bubble. And then sand, it's the same density roughly as mahogany. And that's flattened off. The repair, the deck edge repair is made good. That needs a bit of fine filling. And this corner bit needs a bit of filler added to it. But pass that around if you want. There are some sharp edges on, so just be a little bit careful.
Wonderful. Any questions?
I hope you enjoyed that because I did too. Thank you very much.
Any questions?
No? It must have been good then.
We'll just take a quick round of applause.
Thank you very much.
No, thank you. Great, really interesting.